You are listening to the David Feldman Show, davidfeldmanshow.com, and I hope he's here. Howie Klein, are you there?
I am here. In fact, that applause made me start applauding also. I never realized applause makes you want to applaud.
My friend Liam McEnany had $250, and he hired Rudy for Cameo, so we played it.
Fantastic.
It's really funny. It is. I'll send you a copy of it. Well, Howie Klein is the founder and treasurer of the Blue America PAC, which raises money for progressive candidates around the country, and he also writes Down With Tyranny. There's accountability in this world, Howie Klein, and I'm going to hold you accountable. Okay?
Okay.
All right. This is what you wrote about Afghanistan on June 23rd. Nope, that's not it. This is what you said, and I want to know if you want to take this back. This was a tweet you have. June 23rd, 2021, Howie Klein. The Wall Street... I'm sorry?
A tweet?
This was a tweet, but it's also from Down With Tyranny.
Oh, okay. Because usually I only tweet when I'm drunk.
Well, you were drunk tweeting. I want to know if you still stand by this. This is your tweet from June 23rd. This was 6 weeks ago. Okay? The Wall Street Journal reports that the Afghan government could collapse within 6 months. My guess, having spent a great deal of time there twice, and not just in Kabul, is that the inevitable collapse will come closer to 6 weeks, will come in closer to 6 weeks than 6 months. 6 weeks later to the day.
Why would I take that back? I am very proud of that.
I think you're going to get
Biden for me as his national security advisor.
What did you know that the CIA didn't know?
Well, you know what, David, honestly, that scares me. And I've written about being scared about that. First of all, they had to have known. It's impossible that they didn't know. It's not like I'm like Einstein or something like that. Anyone would know that the Afghan army was a shell, and they certainly knew that. The generals have been telling, some of the colonels, I don't know about the generals, have been telling them that there's no Afghan army for real. People like Ghani and everyone below him who could get away with it was stealing the money. You probably heard this already today, but he tried to steal so much money on his way out yesterday in a helicopter that he couldn't all get stuffed into the helicopter, and they left stacks of money on the tarmac. That's our money. That's American taxpayer money. They weren't paying the soldiers. Why would the soldiers fight for them? There was no reason to continue fighting for them. Yeah, it looked really bad.
But that's surprising because Ghani seems like a reliable partner.
You're joking, of course, right?
I think didn't he go to Harvard? Isn't he like some interloper?
I don't know where he went, but he does not seem like a reliable partner. He seemed like a fast-talking crook.
Well,
but, Afghanistan, I've been, as you know, I got in a Volkswagen van in 1969, and I drove all over Asia. And the societies that I came across are beyond belief how corrupt they are. I mean, one of the things I remember standing in line for a really long time at an Indian post office. I wanted to send. There were no cell phones then. If you wanted to call your home, it cost you like a week's salary or something. So I wasn't in touch with my family. I was away for so many years and never spoke to them. But I used to send them postcards. So I was in this Indian post office. First of all, people would just cut the line. If they were important or of a high caste, they would just go right to the head of the line, and no one thought anything about it. But that low level of corruption was inbred into the society. Then when I got to the front of the line, finally, I had to have an argument with the person behind the counter about how much it cost to send a postcard. I mean, it's not like, it weighs something that's different from another postcard, and the guy was trying to cheat me. He was trying to pocket a few cents for himself, and that's natural. And I realized that I was, breaking into their way of life. Everywhere in Asia, the corruption is, it permeates society. Now here, there's a lot of
By the way,
corruption.
Peter B. Collins was on earlier, and his father did business in Afghanistan, said exactly what you just said about the corruption.
Well, you can't miss it. I mean, it's like, it's part of the culture, though. It's not always evil. Like I learned pretty quickly. I don't know if I've ever told you this or not, but I actually learned this in Morocco. When my girlfriend and I first got to Europe, and the idea was we were going to, get the van, and then we were going to drive down to Morocco. And then she was going to go back to America, and I was going to go on my happy way. But we picked up her parents who detested me. They totally hated me. I mean, I think they were both psychiatrists, and her mother must have known before I did that I was gay. But we picked them up, and we spent a couple of weeks of misery with them. But one of the things, her mother they had just come from Morocco. We picked them up in Denmark or something, and they were they had this really nice thing. I don't remember what it was. And the mother said, yes, I bargained. And she was like a Lower East Side Jewish lady, so she knew what bargaining was. She said, I bargained and I bargained and I bargained, and I finally got this for $50. It took me 3 hours. And we went there, we found the same thing in the same town, and they started the price because we looked like two impoverished hippies, whereas the mother looked wealthy. They started at $50, where the mother got it down to, and we got it down to $20.
Right.
But that's when I started learning that in the East, it's part of the pattern of life and the rhythm of life is bargaining everywhere. And I remember when I went to Afghanistan is when I started getting serious about actually spending some money. Sometimes I had no money at all. Sometimes a shipment of hash that I sent from these places would get through America, and all of a sudden I would have real money. And in Afghanistan, I remember at one time I wanted to buy, and this I wanted to buy a rug, a beautiful Afghan handmade rug
for Frank Luntz's head.
No, not that kind of rug. I still have this one in my bedroom, as a matter of fact. I love this rug so much. It's so beautiful. I mean, this is like 1969 that I bought this rug, and I still have it and love it and cherish it. In any case, it took me 3 days of bargaining, of sitting down and having tea, walking out in anger. I'll never come back. I hate you. Then coming back the next day. And it took 3 days for me to get the rug at a reasonable price. I learned in Afghanistan that if I showed up anywhere in my shiny new Volkswagen bus, I would pay 5 times the cost of what someone who looked like a disheveled hippie would pay.
Now,
so I would have
what were you doing? Years ago you talked about this. You drove from Europe to Afghanistan
right. So yes. So like I said, my girlfriend had another year of college. I figured I'd spend some time. I had graduated. I didn't, just foot free and fancy, whatever it is, whatever it is. I figured I would just drive to wherever. Didn't have any real plan. And I also didn't have any money at that time at all. So what I did is I would go to the American Express office where hippies would go to cash their American Express traveler's checks. Probably people who are listening don't know what a traveler's check is, but in those days it was a big deal. Everyone who's hearing this story who has any interest at all should go to Netflix next time you go to Netflix and watch this TV show that I just watched called The Serpent, which is about this. Kind of. In any case, I would go to American Express, and there would always be signs like, I'm looking for a ride to, wherever, Kathmandu. I'm looking for a ride to Goa. And eventually I assembled a crew, and they had to pay for the gas and any kind of tolls or anything like that. And I would give them a ride for 1 day. And then if I liked them, I'd give them a ride for another day. And eventually I found the whole crew. So I drove. I didn't know where I was really going to go.
Weren't you held at gunpoint at one time?
Oh, yes. I was held at gunpoint. That's a long time later. But meanwhile, I drove. Are you telling me to get to that and forget?
No,
all
I'm just remembering that you talked about this like 5 years ago, and I'm having the same reaction, which is
Well,
why would anybody do this? That cannot be safe.
No, it wasn't safe. But I was a teenager, and when you're a teenager, you don't know any better. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing something like that now, but I was a kid, and I was having a good time. And, you think you're immortal and nothing's going to happen. And these guys are standing with, I don't know. I don't think they had Uzis then, but they were standing with some kind of dangerous looking thing, and they were going to shoot us. I was with a bunch of other hippies overlooking Kabul in Afghanistan. And, and you see what these Taliban look like now. That's what these guys look like. But it turned out one of the guys was tripping on acid. This Australian guy was tripping on acid at the time. And, after them holding us with our hands over our heads and babbling away in their language, and nothing was happening. We're just standing there with our hands over our heads, and they're making sounds like they're going to kill us. The guy on acid started laughing and took his hands down. He put his hands down, and at first they started going crazy, like they were going to shoot us all. And then eventually they started laughing too, and then we all sat down and smoked a bowl of hash. So, I mean, it was a different kind of world, I guess.
Right. So,
but Afghanistan is one of the countries that I really, really loved, that I absolutely thought was better than any other place. It was Morocco, Afghanistan, Nepal. Those are my three favorites. Can't go to Nepal anymore because of the pollution is so beyond belief that you need an oxygen tank to walk around there. You can still go to Morocco, and obviously you're not going to go to Afghanistan. Well, I was thinking about this a few minutes ago. I was reading how there were 3,000 American residents or American citizens or Americans left in Afghanistan. These are non-embassy employees. These are just Americans who live in Afghanistan, and they're stuck there. And I'm thinking, what do they have, shit for brains? How is it that they didn't get out of there 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days ago or a month ago? What's going on with them? How is it that they're still in Afghanistan? It seems insane. Afghanistan has always been a very, very, very dangerous place. You never see a male. You never see any females, or at least in my day, you didn't see any females. But you never see a male without a gun, and I don't mean a pistol. I mean a long gun. A male wouldn't walk out of his house without his pants. And the likelihood of walking out of his house without his gun is the same as walking out of his house without his pants. Impossible. Never happens.
Right.
One of the things that was interesting for me, most Americans would just go to Kabul and hang out in Kabul. There was always an expat community there, mostly transient on the way back or forth from India. It was a great place. You could get obviously get hash, but you could get any drug. You could, cocaine over the counter, heroin under the counter. You could get any drug you wanted in a pharmacy in Afghanistan, and anything else you wanted in Afghanistan. It was an amazing, amazing corrupt country beyond belief. In fact, I'm going off a tangent here now, but way off a tangent. But at one time I got caught at the border with 50 kilos of the best Mazar-e-Sharif hash, and I was arrested. And they seized my van, and they took my hash, and they threw me in a hole in the earth. This is
really?
Yes, but I luckily, my partner in this enterprise was the Postmaster General of Kabul, and he was the son of a kind of a relative. I mean, yes, a relative of the king's, not a close relative, but a relative of the king, and he had me out of there in one. I don't think I would have lasted one night. He had me out of there before the night. Wow. And the next day, I had my van and my hash back. And they said, you're not going to be able to take this hash out of the country. I said, all right, fine.
But they let you keep your hash.
I had the hash back. Yeah, they didn't keep it. No, they gave it back to me.
Wow. So
I had to sell it in the country. I had to sell it. Basically, I didn't sell it at a loss. But if I would have gotten, my plan was to get it to Scandinavia, where I could have made 10, 20, 30 times more than I paid for it. But instead, I sold it back in Kabul to people who weren't going to go up to Mazar, and this was the best hash in the world. This hash is so good that you could take one toke, and 3 or 4 hours later you're getting higher. That's how. Anyway, what I was going to say is that most people just hung out in Kabul, and I've hung out plenty in Kabul also. But at one point, I went everywhere in the country, and at one point I went with some Canadian friends up into the Hindu Kush, which is there are no roads. And we went by horse. And when I say there were no roads, I meant there were no roads. I mean, none. There's nothing. There's like paths of dirt paths. And the village, well, I fell off the horse. I kind of broke my ankle, bad enough so that I couldn't ride. Winter was coming on. They went back to Kabul. I'm in this little hamlet with basically 2 families in it. And one of them took me in, and I became really good friends with this kid. We totally bonded. And no one had ever heard of the United States. Literally had never heard of it. They had never heard of Europe either. I mean, there was a kind of like an awareness that there was something out there that was different, but they didn't know. No one had experienced electricity. No one knew how to write. I don't know if anyone knew how to read or not, but there was no implements for writing in the little hamlet. My best friend got married while I was there. The wedding was like amazing, but there was not only there were no women at the wedding, no bride, no mother of the groom, no women. We all ate these big platters of food which the women had prepared, and after we got to eat it, then like the big chunks of meat that were in the rice, the dogs would get fed from the platter. The servants, who were actually slaves, would get fed from the platter. And then what was left after that got brought into where the women were in the back of the house. But I lived in that house. I never saw his mother, his sisters, or his wife ever. And I lived in the house with them for a whole winter.
Wow.
So, I remember in Kabul, one time I was walking along, and a Mercedes, which was all rich people had Mercedes there. And a Mercedes pulled up, and these 2 properly dressed women. They weren't wearing, the whole, hooded outfit. They were covered up pretty well. And they both got out. It was near the bazaar. They were going to go into the bazaar and buy something. They had obviously been educated young women who were home visiting their family. All the Afghan families who had wealth would all send their kids to Europe, mostly to France, to be educated. And these women got out of the car, and immediately, before their feet were touching the ground practically, there were these mullahs all over them, spitting on them. When I say spitting, I mean like gobs of phlegm were coming out and being spit at these poor women, who started screaming and jumped back in the car, and the guy rode off. But it was such a primitive society, and then the Russians came in, and there was kind of a renaissance. And the Russians did amazing things for that society. And women suddenly were able to go in the streets and able to, walk around without, being completely covered head to toe. And then the Taliban took over. I was writing to...
Well, I would assume when the CIA was funding the Mujahideen and...
Yes.
Osama bin Laden, that the CIA said, we're not going to help you, Osama bin Laden, if you're going to be sexist or misogynistic, right?
No. They didn't care about that at all.
Our CIA?
Not the CIA. American policy doesn't care about that. Now people are making a fuss about it, but only for their own partisan goals. I remember once having this big fight with a congresswoman. This was I think 2010, so quite a long time ago. And she was saying how we can't. She was a peace person. She ran on peace, and we were all for peace in Afghanistan and withdrawal. But she didn't really want to get out. She didn't think it was right for the troops to get out now because we had to save the women first. And I said, what does that mean? Well, we're going to turn around thousands of years of history and we save the women? I don't even know what save the women means. You're never going to save the women. You want to save the women? Give them all knives and tell them to kill their husbands in the middle of the night. That's the way you're going to save the women. Otherwise, forget it. And she never spoke to me again.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the correct answer. Let me read you something you wrote about Afghanistan, if you don't mind, and we'll talk about it.
I write about Afghanistan almost every day. I don't want to, and I've been impelled to, but go ahead.
This is what you wrote, I believe it was yesterday over at Down With Tyranny. Who lost Afghanistan is a stupid partisan question that will, no doubt, be an election issue for morons. Whose fault was American policy in Afghanistan? Might be a better question. And I know the answer. The fault lays entirely with three men for whom the buck stopped. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. Not Biden, the other three who perpetuated the senseless, actually insane war for 2 decades. You go on to write, all three should be dragged to The Hague in chains to face trial as war criminals and never see the sky again.
And have I ever said anything nice about Joe Biden on your show?
No, that's why I was so. What do you think about
Joe Biden made the right decision. I mean, here I am saying something nice about Joe Biden, but he was right. America should not have been there. I mean, even Trump, when he wanted to get out in his stupidity, but he still wanted to get out of there, he was right also. America has no place and will never have a place in Afghanistan. That's the way it is, and that's the way it'll always be. There is no other place like Afghanistan. I've been everywhere in the world. There is no other place like Afghanistan. It's literally you step back into the biblical times. It has to be a kind of amazing when you see like a wheel. Right. It's just so primitive, and the people are so primitive that it's phenomenal. Now, on some level, when you become friends with these primitive people, it's wonderful because they're not duplicitous. They're literally, I mean, some of them can be, but in the countryside, you tend to not meet duplicitous people. You meet open, honest, hardworking people. And that's why I loved Afghanistan so much. People say, "What'd you like about Afghanistan?" Well, I like the scenery, sure. I like the food. I like the music, but really, it was the people. And that's what it was. It was just
okay. But accountability. Incredible. Let's talk about accountability. It goes back to Rumsfeld, Tenet, Cheney, and Bush. Dr. Juan Cole will be coming up in about an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, good. He knows what he's talking about.
He does. And I want to read you something he wrote as an explainer about Afghanistan. Let me read this to you and ask you what this sounds remarkably similar to. This is what Juan Cole wrote about Afghanistan over the weekend. Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic state. You have your mostly Sunni Pashtuns who speak an Eastern Iranian language. You have your Sunni Tajiks north of Kabul who speak a dialect of Persian called Dari, and you have Sunni speakers of other Persian dialects in the west near Iran. You have the Persian-speaking Shiites in the center of the country, the Hazara, who often have an East Asian appearance. In the far north, you have Sunni Turkic speakers, Uzbeks and Turkmen.
I don't want to criticize your guest, who I respect and like he didn't get that 100% right, but it doesn't matter.
Why? It reminds me.
Dari is really like an archaic form of Farsi, the language of Iran, and I know that because I learned how to speak it.
Okay, it sounds like invading Iraq. The kind of thinking that
Iraq was a relatively modern society.
But I'm talking about the divisions, the sectarian conflict, the potential there was no way you can bring these people together unless you're, well, I don't want to say it, but what kind of thinking went into this invasion of Afghanistan? Why were we, did Cheney, Bush, and Rumsfeld really think that they could save Afghanistan united and turn it into a democracy?
Well, I don't think they ever thought about that or cared about it. And I don't know what was in any of their minds, of course, or especially not Cheney's, who was in charge. I don't know what he was thinking. But I can tell you that what it seemed like to me at the time was what these guys, it was like some guys in Iowa who had never been out of Dubuque County were making decisions and didn't have a clue about Afghans or anything about Afghanistan. And American policy, I felt, was being set by people who had no idea what they were dealing with, like none whatsoever. And it still seems to me that still seems the case to me to this day, especially when you think of all the Americans who have been there in the military and in related situations, have been there for so many years. But then I think about it and I realize, but where have they been? They've only been in Kabul, one of the most corrupt places on earth, and in Bagram, the U.S. recently, the U.S. Air Base. And that's it. They don't go anywhere else unless they're, fighting. And then then it's a different thing. They're going there and fighting. I have a story, by the way, going up in about 20 minutes about Afghanistan, where I try to expand on the stuff that I've written. And I talk about that a little bit. And it starts off with Hamid Karzai, who is the longest serving president while it was a puppet state of America. And he very much criticizes the U.S. In fact, I cut out the whole first 10 minutes of the video just to get right to his critique of the U.S. There. Now, he was a very corrupt guy also. But like I said, that's part of the rhythm of life in that part of the world. Corruption is our name. That is what it is. No, it would be impossible not to be corrupt. I'm sure people hearing the story about Ghani stuffing cash into his helicopter would say, so what? Oh yeah, and what's the punchline? Right. I mean, it's just the way it is there. But anyway, Karzai is a corrupt guy too. But what shocked me today, I mean, his stuff was interesting. The stuff he says, you watch it and you'll see. But he's there in Afghanistan with his family, including his beautiful young granddaughters, 3 of them that were in the video with him. And he didn't get out. Now, the Taliban could go to his house in an hour and just slaughter everybody in the house without thinking twice about it. And I mean, unless he's already made some kind of deal with them, which is very possible, that could happen. And a lot of Americans heard the NPR show the other day that had the woman who came to the U.S. when she was 8 or 11 or something like that. And lived in the U.S., went to elementary school, high school, college in the U.S., and then went back to Afghanistan until yesterday. She was the acting minister of education. And she had an opportunity to get out also. And she didn't take it. She said, unlike most of the Afghan cabinet who fled, she said to her husband, and she has young children, she said to her husband, our whole country is here. We're going to leave when our whole country is here. She was in charge of educating girls, which the Taliban isn't a big fan of. And she knew what she was doing. I mean, at the end there was a very poignant moment at the end of this broadcast, which is available online if people are interested in it, where she says, I may not be talking to your audience again. And that's how it's sung. And she knew that there was a very good chance that she and her family were going to be slaughtered, which I'm kind of guessing is going to happen.
Hey. Hey. But
you know something? What I wrote in the piece that's going up in a few minutes on my blog is this. The people that, Seth Moulton, I don't want to use the word, but he's so fucking stupid, and others who think they know something because they were on duty in Afghanistan for a minute, what they don't seem to understand is that that many of the Afghans, I don't want to say every Afghan, but many of the Afghans who worked for the U.S. were collaborators. Do you remember, what happened to the people in France who collaborated with the Nazis? What happened to the people in Poland and Russia who collaborated with the Nazis when the Nazis were the occupying power? We were the occupying power in Afghanistan. The Afghans who worked for us and did stuff for us and fought for us, they're not all, some wonderful interpreters. They were doing it for the money, and they were selling out their country. Now, not all of them. I'm not saying that, but probably 90% of them is my guess. And yes, there has never been in history a time when collaborators weren't punished, when the occupiers were thrown out. And the occupiers just got thrown out or walked out. And some of I'm not wishing it on anybody, but some of these people are going to be punished. And, if Seth Moulton doesn't have the stomach for it, too bad. Let him go over there and trade himself 10 Afghan interpreters.
Before you go,
Already?
Well, we can go a couple of minutes longer.
No, I'm going to talk to my old partner from 415 because the drummer in Romeo Void passed away.
I was just going to ask you about Romeo Void. But let me very quickly, we made a list based on what you provided over Down With Tyranny of all the blue dog Democrats we have to get rid of. And I'm posting the graphic right now. And this is a good primer to remind our listeners not to vote for these Democrats. Sanford Bishop, Caroline Bordeaux, Ed Case, Jim Hooper, Luis Carrera, Jim Costa, Charlie Crist, Jared Golden, our friend, he used to be our friend, Vicente Gonzalez, Josh Gottheimer, my sister's congressman, Stephanie Murphy, Tom O'Harahan, Brad Schneider, Kurt Schrader, David Scott, Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger, and Mike Thompson. Are those going to be our enemies throughout?
Those are the blue dogs. That's it. That's the whole blue dog caucus. That's who they are. Every one of them is a blue dog. People should understand that a blue dog is not an adjective. It's an organization. You pay dues. You elect officers. It's a real thing. They have policies. They act together to undermine the rest of the country. And that's them. And are they our enemies? They're my enemies. They've always been my enemies. And if you don't like Republicans, there's no reason to like a blue dog. They're basically the same thing. Not exactly the same thing, but in many ways they are exactly the same thing. But they're the bad guys. They are bad guys. Blue America has a special page called Primary Blue Dogs. And even if you're the kind of person that says, well, they're the lesser of two evils, and I have to vote for them against the Republican. Fine, I don't agree, but go ahead and do it. But this is primary season. Help us to get rid of these guys, so you're not voting against the lesser of two evils come November, but you're voting for someone who's really good. Let's vote for people who are really good, and not for these awful blue dogs. They are busy right now trying to undermine Biden's family plan. Which is the best legislation since the New Deal.
Right. So we will keep this graphic going from now until the primaries and remind people to get rid of the following Democrats: Sanford Bishop from Georgia, Caroline Bordeaux from Georgia, Ed Case from Hawaii, Jim Cooper from Tennessee, Luis Carrera is she from Indiana? I believe. Luis Carrera, from California. Jim Costa from California, Charlie Crist from Florida, Henry Cuellar from Texas, Jared Golden from Maine, Vicente Gonzalez from Texas, Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey, Stephanie Murphy from Florida, Tim O'Hallahan, Arizona, Brad Schneider, Illinois, Kurt Schrader, Oregon, David Scott, Georgia, Mike Sherrill, New Jersey, Abigail Spanberger, Virginia, and Mike Thompson from California. Know your enemy.
Isn't that Mikey? It's Mikey Sherrill. It's a woman.
Mikey Sherrill. Know your enemy. They're your enemy, right?
Exactly.
Thank you.
By the way, I asked Marie London, not Marie London, Marie Newman. Do you remember her at all?
Yeah.
So I asked her to join us on the show next week or the week after.
Congressman Marie Newman?
Congresswoman Marie Newman, yes. She won. She went up against a blue dog, as a matter of fact, named Dan Lipinski. She got defeated by Big Money the first time she ran. She ran again, and she beat him and Big Money, and she's now a member of Congress. And she has totally lived up to everything she promised. And I asked her to come on the show and talk with us about that, about what her promises were and how she has gone about to live up to those promises.
Wow. Is that next week?
She's getting back to me with the date. I think it could probably be the week after, but it might be next week.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Howie Klein. Read him over Down With Tyranny. Howie Klein is the founder and treasurer of the Blue America PAC. They raise money for progressive candidates. Thank you, Howie.
Thank you, David. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Howie Klein, everybody.